Most systems don't fail because no one is paying attention. They fail because feedback arrives too late. In a healthy system, actions produce consequences quickly. Mistakes are visible. Corrections happen early. But as systems grow, feedback stretches, signals weaken, delays increase. The gap between decision and consequence widens, and by the time damage becomes visible, the decisions that caused it are ancient history. This creates a dangerous illusion. Everything appears stable. Metrics look acceptable. Processes continue as usual, but stability is no longer real. It's just untested. When feedback is delayed, people optimize locally. They focus on what they can see. They ignore what they can't. Short-term success hides long-term risk. A decision looks good today. The cost shows up 3 years later. And by then, responsibility is diffuse. No one feels accountable. Not because they're careless, but because the system no longer points clearly to cause and effect. Here's what this looks like in practice. Before 2008, the mortgage industry appeared stable. Homes had always appreciated. Lending standards seemed prudent. Mortgage-backed securities were rated AAA, but the feedback loop was broken. Here's how it worked. A mortgage broker originated a loan. They collected fees. Then, they sold the loan immediately to an investment bank. The broker never saw the default. Their incentive was volume. Close the loan, collect the fee, move to the next one. The investment bank bundled these loans with thousands of others into securities. They sold them to pension funds, insurance companies, foreign governments. Again, the person who made the decision to bundle risky loans with safe ones never saw the outcome. By the time default spiked in 2006, 2007, the original loan originators had closed thousands of other loans. The bundlers had moved on to the next securities. The investors were left holding assets worth far less than they paid. The feedback loop was broken. The consequence was delayed, and the system drifted toward collapse. By 2008, when the feedback finally arrived, it was catastrophic. The problem wasn't that people didn't know risks existed. The problem was that knowing came too late to change behavior. When you originate a loan and sell it the next day, you never experience the consequences of approving a bad loan. The feedback that would correct your behavior never reaches you. This isn't malice, it's structure. The system separated decision from consequence. And when that happens, decision quality decays. Consider another example. Boeing 737 MAX. In 2015, Boeing was developing a new version of their best-selling 737. They needed to go to market quickly to compete with Airbus. During testing and development, engineers flagged concerns. The MCAS system, an automated control that helps with handling, had design flaws. It relied on a single sensor. If that sensor failed, the system could push the nose down repeatedly, indefinitely. Engineers from different teams raised this concern. It was documented. It was discussed. But certification was the critical path. Delays meant losing market share. Delays meant costs. In 2017, the 737 MAX was certified and entered service. In October 2018, a 737 MAX crashed in Indonesia. 189 people died. Investigations began. In March 2019, another 737 MAX crashed in Ethiopia. 157 people died. Only then, after 346 people were dead, did regulators ground all 737 MAX aircraft worldwide. The engineering concerns existed. They were known. They were documented. But they arrived in the wrong context. They came during the certification process, when the incentive was to move forward, not to delay. The feedback that should have prevented the crashes never reached the decision makers as a stopping force. It reached them as a technical detail among many, and the organizational pressure to maintain the schedule was stronger than the engineering warning. By the time the feedback was powerful enough to stop the aircraft, it was too late. People had died. This pattern repeats. The Space Shuttle Challenger, 1986. Engineers at Morton Thiokol, the company that built the O-ring seals, warned that launching in cold weather was dangerous. The rings became brittle in freezing temperatures. They raised this concern the night before the launch. NASA management overruled them. The launch proceeded. 73 seconds later, the O-ring failed. The external tank was breached. Structural failure cascaded. The Challenger disintegrated. 7 people died. The feedback existed. The engineers had the correct information. The Rogers Commission investigation found that NASA management knew of the O-ring risk but chose to proceed. Again, the feedback that should have prevented the disaster was overruled because the system's incentive structure valued schedule over safety. Why do organizations build slow feedback systems? Because slow feedback insulates decision makers from consequences. If you make a decision and face the result immediately, you can't hide the mistake. You have to correct it. But if you make a decision and the consequence arrives 3 years later, you've been promoted. You've moved to a different role. You've retired. The consequence falls on someone else. This isn't an accident. It's structural. Organizations don't deliberately create slow feedback systems because they're trying to fail. They create them because delayed feedback protects the people making decisions. A CEO can order cost-cutting that damages long-term quality and leave the company before the quality problems become visible. An engineer can approve a design they're uncertain about, knowing the failure will happen after they've moved on. A loan officer can approve risky mortgages, knowing the defaults will occur when they're in a different job. When feedback is slow, responsibility becomes diffuse. And when responsibility is diffuse, accountability disappears. This is why the most dangerous systems are the ones where feedback is delayed. Fast feedback creates learning. Slow feedback creates drift. If you touch a hot stove, you learn instantly. The feedback is clear, immediate, and painful. You don't touch it again. But if the burn appeared a week later, you'd never connect it to the stove. You'd never learn. And you'd keep making the same mistake. Systems are the same. In software development, feedback is fast. You write code, run a test, see if it works. Mistakes get caught in minutes. The system self-corrects. In construction, feedback is slow. You design a building, construct for months, and discover the problem only when it leaks. By then, the architect has moved on. In finance, feedback was deliberately slowed. Originators sold loans immediately. Bundlers sold securities immediately. Investors didn't discover problems for years. By then, the damage was systemic. Fast feedback systems self-correct. Slow feedback systems drift. This is a law. So when you examine a system that's producing damage, ask how long between a bad decision and visible consequence. If the answer is days or weeks, the system can correct itself. If the answer is months or years, drift is inevitable because people adapt to what they can see. And if consequences are invisible, behavior won't change. Climate change is a slow feedback system. Emissions today create problems decades later, so behavior doesn't adjust. Food poisoning is a fast feedback system. Eat bad food. Get sick in hours. So behavior adjusts immediately. Healthcare outcomes are slow feedback systems. A doctor's treatment decision shows results over years. Safety problems accumulate before becoming visible. Manufacturing quality is a fast feedback system. Build a defective product. Customers return it immediately. Quality improves rapidly. The pattern is consistent. Once you see how long feedback takes to reach decision makers, you know whether the system can correct itself or whether it will drift. Systems with fast feedback stay aligned. Systems with slow feedback drift. And once feedback-driven drift begins, outcomes stop being accidental. They become inevitable.